Hi everyone.
Greetings.
We're in the Pure Worship book. We're in a new chapter, chapter 18. My great rage will flare up, taken from a partial verse of Ezekiel 38, verse 18.
So we're forced to ask, what will cause Yahweh's great rage to flare up, and where, if possible, can we know?
Mm-hmm.
What's the scenario? What's the scene? What's the geography of the scene where God gets really mad?
Mm-hmm.
So the Armageddon scenario, they say, focus here is on God's attack provokes Jehovah's anger. Jehovah defends his people during the war of Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the important takeaway, which is you can be assured that you will be saved if you're a faithful member of the great crowd today. You will survive Armageddon into God's new world.
So they have a picture on this page with a family sitting around a table with Bibles in their on the table, reading, and somebody is watching from the window, like looking out the window, I guess, and you can see kind of shadows and people outside, and I guess they're giving you an illustration of what it's going to be like during Armageddon, where you're going to be in darkened rooms trying to read your Bible.
But you will survive.
That
has been the message. I do recall a book that they published in the mid-50s. It's not well known now, but it was their basic message back in the 50s, 60s, and when I joined in 70.
You can survive Armageddon.
You may survive Armageddon into God's new world.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So the message is still the same, and it's what we would now have to regard as false assurance, and it's therefore parallel to the left behind idea that's out there in Christendom, which is you don't have to worry about the Great Tribulation because you won't be there. The Watchtower says you will be there, but you'll be safe.
Right.
Let's read the few paragraphs here and then look up the scriptures that are cited here but hardly quoted.
Right. Okay, there's just 3 paragraphs introing this. The men, women, and children stand together, singing a kingdom song. An elder then offers a heartfelt prayer, begging Jehovah for his protection. The members of the congregation are confident that Jehovah will care for them, but they still need comfort and reassurance. Outside, the sounds of battle split the air. Armageddon has begun. During the war of Armageddon, Jehovah will execute people not in a cold, clinical manner, but in a great rage. Read Ezekiel 38:18. He will direct the explosive force of his anger, not against one army or one nation, but against countless individuals living across the globe. On that day, those slain by Jehovah will be from one end of the earth clear to the other end of the earth. Jeremiah 25, verses 29 and 33. What causes Jehovah, the God of love, the one described as merciful and compassionate and slow to anger, to take such an action, flaring up in a great rage? Let us see how the answer to that question can bring us great comfort, fill us with courage, and motivate us in our preaching work today.
It needs to be said, the early church believed that the Christians not only would be persecuted up to the Great Tribulation, but would likely be martyred during the Great Tribulation. The whole book of Revelation is about that. And what you're doing here is providing false comfort that in the Armageddon scenario, you will travel through. You 8 million plus who are faithful Jehovah's Witnesses will travel through. So it's false comfort. And the courage, therefore, it engenders is false courage, because it's not courage based on truth. And that's why their reference here to this scenario, that, by the way, they reference Revelation 16, the Armageddon passage, right in the first paragraph. They don't quote it. But this scenario of elder offering heartfelt prayer, begging Jehovah for his protection. And you realize, if you know the history of the Watchtower, that that's exactly what happened during the Nazi persecution in the Second World War. And James Penton has spoken a great deal about that in his book, Jehovah's Witnesses in Nazi Germany. So we recommend that book for those who want to know the real truth behind the last great tribulation that you anticipated was started already when World War II began.
I think the title is JWs and the Third Reich.
Yeah.
Jehovah's Witnesses and the Third Reich.
He's gone into great detail of the whole situation from the beginning of the Nazi era to the end of World War II.
And they expected protection.
They expected protection. Why? Because they thought the tribulation was upon them, and it would lead directly to Armageddon within months, as Rutherford had said in 41, the remaining months till Armageddon. The German brothers took this seriously, and I remember that we did a video on this. We'll link it at the end. It's based on this book. We Left Jehovah's Witnesses, Edmund C. Bruce. It's all testimonies. And I think it's the single longest testimony is Bill and Joan Cetnar talking about their life at Bethel and leaving the Watchtower. And I was reminded when we read this of one of the anecdotes that Cetnar records of information that shocked him when he was at Bethel, because they were visited by a survivor of the Nazi era, Brother Frank from Germany. That's spelled Franke. And Brother Frank explained that it was their perception that made them so brave. What was the perception? I'll just read you a sample paragraph, and you can get the rest by looking at the video. This is from page 79 in this book by Edmund C. Bruce, We Left Jehovah's Witnesses. Belief in God's protection helps to explain how 2,000 Jehovah's Witnesses fearlessly stood and died before Hitler's firing squads. They had been told that God would stop the bullets. It had been explained that the Jonadabs, that's the old name for the great crowd, could not be killed because of their expectation of going through Armageddon. But the remnant, that is, of the 144,000, should expect persecution that would end in death. Brother Frank explained that before this announcement, about 80% of the German brethren felt that they were of the remnant. After Rutherford's talk and the publication of the article, His Name, in the Watchtower, the number of those claiming to be members of the remnant dropped to just 20%. So in other words, they've been told of two different hopes. The remnant would die because they had to go to heaven, but the great crowd, the Jonadabs, would survive, and therefore were invulnerable. He calls them here invincible. So that was the overall message, and this was a shock to the Cetnars. And yet that message hasn't changed, has it?
No.
This is comfort.
I mean,
all of this is comfort.
When you're a witness, you fear Armageddon, but if what you fear is that you won't make it because you're not good enough.
Yeah.
It's not, but if you make it through Armageddon, that's kind of like a sign that you were good enough. So that's always your goal, is to make it through Armageddon.
Let's look more closely at the single verse from Ezekiel they cite here to give you this impression. What's the title of the chapter again?
My great rage will flare up.
So God's going to get really mad at the nations, but because you're a faithful Jehovah's Witness, you can hope to survive. So, but if you look in the context, first of all, the verse itself, all of it, and then the verses around it. What's this about?
So 18 says, on that day, the day when Gog invades the land of Israel, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah, my great rage will flare up. So that's 18. So they don't tell you it's the land of Israel when this is going to happen.
And then going through 19 to 21, you get more of a picture of the geography of the situation.
In my zeal, in the fire of my fury, I will speak. And in that day there will be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Because of me, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the wild beasts of the field, all the reptiles that creep on the ground, and all the humans on the surface of the earth, will tremble, and the mountains will be thrown down, and the cliffs will fall, and every wall will collapse to the ground. I will call for a sword against him on my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah, Every man's sword will be against his own brother.
So where is God's wrath being demonstrated, and what's the situation? An attack upon the land of Israel, said twice here.
Mm-hmm.
The mountains of Israel. An earthquake that will rock Israel and apparently the rest of the world, because even the animals are going to feel it.
Change the terrain.
Change the terrain of the earth. And then a reference in 21 to my mountains. Well, God's got several mountains. Mm-hmm. We think, of course, of Sinai, but Zion is the main one. That's where his government is supposed to be forever, according to text we know, even as Jehovah's Witnesses. But also, there's, of course, the Mount of Transfiguration. There's the mountains of Judah. That's the usual reference here. When he talks about my mountains, he's talking about the mountains, the high, we wouldn't even call them mountains. It's just a hilly range. The Judean desert right now, but on the west side of the Dead Sea. So all the geographic references you need to correctly interpret this are right there in the text.
Yeah.
And why is God angry? Because of this situation that has developed, all nations gathered against his people. Yeah. They cite Jeremiah, but the only part they cite of Jeremiah
are 2 verses.
And partial at that, right?
Yeah. It's they reference Jeremiah 25, verse 29 and 33.
So let's read those 2 verses again and then fill in the blanks.
Okay, so 29 says, "For look, I am bringing calamity, first on the city that bears my name. Should you go unpunished? You will not go unpunished, for I am calling for a sword against all the inhabitants of the earth, declares Jehovah of armies." That's all of 29. And all of 33 is, "And those slain by Jehovah in that day will be from one end of the earth clear to the other end of the earth. They will not be mourned, nor will they be gathered up or buried. They will become like manure on the surface of the ground." I do remember that verse.
Yeah, that was often referenced.
Yeah.
So
but only that part about people you don't like, they're going to be manure on the ground.
So, first of all, what is God called here? The God of Israel. That's why all this is happening, because he is the God of Israel, and he's going to demonstrate that he's the God of Israel. And what's the city called by his name? All you have to do is go back to the beginning of this section, verse 17, 18.
Yeah.
"So I took the cup from the Lord, that is Yahweh's hand, and made all of the nations to whom Yahweh sent me drink it." Where does it start, this drinking? Jerusalem, and the cities of Judah, its kings and officials, to make them a desolation. So nothing here about spiritual Jerusalem. The city called by his name is obviously the same city that had disgraced his name, and therefore he had to vindicate his own name by, first of all, judging his own people, and then by saving his own people, bringing them back from the exile. Jeremiah is the one who predicts all this, right?
Yeah.
So this destruction, this cup being transferred after he judges his own people, the cup is going to be transferred to every other nation. So that's the sequence. The beginning of the Gentile times is his judgment on his own city and his own people, his own land. But following the Gentile times, this scenario, well, all the nations will have to drink the cup of his wrath.
And then if you want to fill in more, we could read from 27 to the end, so that you get those 2 that they quote, but 27 provides information too that you need.
Let's fill in the blanks.
"And you must say to them, this is what Jehovah of armies, the God of Israel, says. Drink and get drunk, and vomit and fall, so that you cannot get up, because the sword that I am sending among you. And if they refuse to take the cup out of your hand to drink, say to them, this is what Jehovah of armies says, you must drink it. For look, I am bringing calamity, first on the city that bears my name, should you go unpunished. You will not go unpunished, for I am calling for a sword against all the inhabitants of the earth, declares Jehovah of armies. And you are to prophesy all these words to them, and say to them, From on high Jehovah will roar, and from his holy dwelling he will make his voice heard. He will roar loudly against his abiding place, shouting like those treading the winepress. He will sing triumphantly against all the inhabitants of the earth. A noise will resound to the ends of the earth, for Jehovah has controversy with the nations. He will personally pass judgment on all humans, and he will put the wicked to the sword, declares Jehovah. This is what Jehovah of armies says. Look, a calamity is spread from nation to nation, and a great tempest will be unleashed from the remotest parts of the earth. And those slain by Jehovah in that day will be from one end of the earth clear to the other end of the earth. They will be mourned. They will not be mourned, nor will they be gathered up or buried. They will become like manure on the surface of the ground.
So what is Armageddon about? It's the cleansing of his people and his city, but it's also a judgment on the nations that have dared to attack his people and his city.
It's the coming of the judgment, the day of judgment for all, really.
So the Gentile time starts with a judgment on Jerusalem and his people, and it also ends with a judgment. That just read Zechariah 12 through 14, or the last chapter of Isaiah 66, and it all comes into focus. What Jeremiah is saying here will one day happen. Later in Jeremiah, in chapter 30, he makes the point that the very first reference, actually, to the Great Tribulation. He says, Alas, that day is so great, there is none like it, a time of distress for Jacob, yet he shall be saved out of it. And in verse 11 of chapter 30, For I am with you to save you, declares Yahweh. I will make a full end of the nations among whom I scattered you, but of you I will not make a full end. I will discipline you in just measure, and I will by no means leave you unpunished.
Even verse 30 that we read before, he calls that place his abiding place. Do we notice that as a witness? Because we think he doesn't really care about places. And yet he calls that his abiding place. And throughout the Old Testament, he always says his eyes and his heart will always be there.
Yeah.
So to think that the kingdom doesn't have an element of it being on the earth is wrong. It's definitely on the earth, but it centers around that place.
Well, what kingdom is there on earth that doesn't have a capital city? And that's exactly how the Old Testament and New see the centrality of Jerusalem. What's our link?
We're going to link to the Cetnar video that is you were referencing before about the Jonadabs. XJW Bethelite Bill Cetnar on Rutherford's Invincible Jonadabs and Nor's Truth from the Sixth Floor.
We also have a playlist of the Cetnars themselves, right? Which is a part of the bigger playlist, XJW Testimonies. So we'll link to the Cetnar playlist.
Okay, good.
See you soon.